Welcome back. Little change of scenery. Didn't change my shirt though. Maybe I should, like they do on game shows, to make it look like it's a different day, but it's not. All right, you ready to talk about royalties? As you might guess, this is among the most important provisions in any agreement is how you're getting paid. We talked about ownership and control and income. We've talked about ownership and control already, and now the income part with advances in this becomes of critical importance. So make sure you have the royalty section in front of you. And we're going to go back through it pretty thoroughly because it's that important. So this is paragraph 8. And, we talked about what a full publishing agreement is. It's where you split the money 50-50. And you took my word for that. And then you read an agreement, which was a full publishing agreement. And the first thing you run into, the writer is not getting 50% of the income. It says in paragraphs A and B of section 8 is concerning sheet music, print music, and they're paid on a very different basis there. They're paid a percentage of the wholesale price, much the same way artists are paid a royalty on record sales. So let me just talk about this globally for just a second. Historically, the reason why the royalty section might look like this with respect to sheet music, and we know that's not that important, but it's important as a contractual principle. And the contractual principle here is that sometimes sections make sense at a particular point in time, and then things change and they don't make sense anymore. So if you'd played the what if game and said, whoa, what if this doesn't make sense at some point in the future? How will this hurt me? Well, it could. So the reason originally that sheet music sections and the royalties was calculated in this manner is that most, if not all, publishing companies did their own sheet music. And so if they were to pay you 50% of the income that they generated from that sheet music, that would be paying you way too much as a writer because they're getting 50%, but they're absorbing all of the costs that are involved in selling that sheet music, which can be considerable. You pay somebody to transcribe this stuff. You pay, or whatever you call that, when you turn music into sheet music. You pay to have the product manufactured. You pay to have the product distributed. You pay to have the product promoted. And so it didn't make sense for there to be a 50-50 split when the publisher is incurring all their costs. Just the same way a record company doesn't pay royalties generally like that. So what they do, they structured it like this so that you get paid a percentage of the wholesale price. So if you run into a publishing agreement like this and you see a royalty section like this, the first thing you need to ask the publisher is, do you do your own sheet music? Because if you do, then this royalty structure might work. It might not, but it might work. If you don't do your own sheet music, all you do is license it out to somebody like the Hal Leonard Company that we talked about before, where they just go, here's the rights to these songs, you guys go make sheet music, and then Hal Leonard pays the publisher a royalty for that sheet music. If that's the case, then this income should be treated like every other kind of income where you do split it 50-50 because there is no costs that is being absorbed by the publisher. They're just saying, Hal, go do this. They're essentially just licensing it to them, and then they're being paid a licensing fee for that with no commensurate expenses involved. So, number one, you ask, hey, sheet music publisher, do you do your own sheet music? If you don't, if you just license it out, then get this crap out of here. And let's just treat it like the other income you can see in the remaining sections where we divide the income 50-50. Okay, so that's your first thing you do with sheet music. The second thing you do is, well, if you do your own sheet music, yeah, I said do. If you do your own sheet music, then I will accept a royalty. Now, a couple of things to remember about royalties. Sometimes in these agreements, you'll find in paragraph A, which deals with piano copies, when you buy a piano, just 2 pages of music from Adele's Rolling in the Deep, the piano stuff for it. Those are piano copies. Used to be, and sometimes you still will see, that they don't pay you a percentage rate. They pay you a specific dollar and cents amount. So it might say 10 cents or 15 cents per copy of piano music. Here's another lesson to learn. Generally speaking, try to avoid specific dollar and cents amounts as your royalty. We call that a penny rate. When a royalty is expressed in a dollar and cents figure. We call that a penny rate. And the reason why you want to avoid penny rates is because in general, prices for things go up. And if you negotiate a penny rate based on something's current price, when that price goes up, that penny rate is no longer as fair of a deal. So if you see a penny rate, cross that out and change it to a percentage rate. If you are dealing with a percentage rate, then these percentages might be a little small. So even if you're doing your own sheet music, Mr. Music Publisher, instead of 10%, that royalty should be 20%. So that paragraph A in royalties deals with sheet music in a piano copy form, and instead of 10%, it should be 20% if they're doing their own sheet music. Paragraph B just deals with different types of sheet music where they're doing whole books of your songs or a whole album worth of your material if you happen to be a writer, artist, and different configurations like that. Once again, that royalty should be greater, 20% or even higher, because usually those things are solely related to, the value that the underlying record might have. So in negotiating these two paragraphs, if the publishing company is doing their own sheet music, those royalties should be higher. 20%, I would say, would be acceptable. In addition, we have another example of proration here. If I could just read that section to you for one moment. In the event that such composition shall be used or caused to be used in whole or in part in conjunction with one or more musical compositions in a folio or album, writer shall be entitled to receive that proportion of said 10% which a subject musical composition shall bear to the total number of musical compositions contained in such folio. So here's the concept of proration again, and I would just want to demonstrate how that can hurt you, is that if you are receiving, let's say, a 20% royalty in general when they sell a book of your songs, if instead they make a songbook, the best power ballads of the 80s, and it's got 10 songs on it, and one of your songs is the 10 and 9 from other people, then instead of getting 20%, obviously, your royalty will be prorated. And the way proration works as a mathematical formula, and I'll send you a worksheet on this, the way proration operates is that your normal royalty, 20%, is multiplied by a fraction. Didn't know we were going to do algebra here, did you? Is multiplied by a fraction, the numerator of which is the total number of the writer's compositions that appear in that book, and the denominator, that's the lower number of a fraction, is the total number of compositions, including the writers that are in that book. So if you have a 20% royalty and you have one song in a book of 10 songs, it would be 20 times a fraction, 1/10, one of your songs over 10 other songs. So instead of 20% royalty, you'd be getting 2%. And that makes sense in theory because you only have 1/10 of the songs. You should only get 1/10 of the royalty. If they paid everybody their full royalty and everybody was getting 20%, 20 times 10 would be 200%. They'd lose money every time they sold a copy. So it makes sense in theory. However, the way it might hurt you is twofold. And they're not that serious, but just ways of thinking about dangers that can be inherent in an agreement that you got to learn how to pick up on. Number one, it could be that they're putting your song in there with a bunch of crappy songs, and your song is the one that's driving that compilation. And it's cannibalizing sales of your individual material that's not combined with other people's material. So that's not right. If they have one good song of yours and then 9 other songs that aren't that good, you should be making more than that. So what you try to do, if you have enough bargaining power, and it's very difficult, is to try to limit their ability to do that without getting some sort of approval from you, number one. Limit the number of times they can do it. Maybe they can only do it twice a year or with 2 songs per year. Any kind of limitation you can put on their ability to do that will be beneficial to you. And that comes up in a variety of other kinds of agreements as well. So just know that when your royalty is being prorated, the danger is that your material is being used to drive sales, but you're only getting the same amount as some other material that might not be as good. Also, it could just be a clever ruse where they combine your material with public domain material, which is not royalty bearing. So if you're Mariah Carey and you wrote All I Want for Christmas and they put it into a compilation with 9 other Christmas songs dating from the 1800s, and hers is one of 10 songs, not only is her song probably driving this, but even if it weren't driving it, maybe there's other classic songs on there like Silent Night, which might be just as good as Mariah Carey's song. The publisher is not paying any royalties on that material because it's in the public domain and it's so old. So when you see proration, a common way to protect yourself against that is to say your royalty will be prorated using a fraction, using your normal royalty times a fraction, the numerator of which is the number of songs you have on there, and the denominator of which is the total number of royalty-bearing songs, so that they can't diminish your royalty even though they're not paying royalties to other people. So I'll show you when we mark this whole thing up where you would insert that. But you can see the sentence there. It says you just put royalty-bearing compositions as the denominator. I think that's enough about sheet music, don't you think? Not that important, but you never know. And for some artists, they have songs that sell very well in sheet music. So, and in these days when we're all trapped inside a house, who knows? Music, playing music around the house might be the most common form of entertainment. In this neighborhood today at 4 o'clock this afternoon, there's going to be porch concerts all over the neighborhood. So you never know. What if there's a pandemic? All right, paragraph C takes into account mostly every other kind of income that you might have. And so you can see here, let's read along with it because this language is really, really important. 50% of any and all net sums actually received, less any costs for collection by publisher from mechanical rights, electrical transcription and reproduction rights, motion picture, synchronization, and television rights, so-called new technology rights such as streaming, permanent downloads, satellite radio transmission, video games, cell phone rings, and all other rights except public performance rights, including the use thereof in lyrics, videos, magazines, etc., shall be 50%. Okay, so it's virtually trying to take into account all income except performing rights there. There's really, really important language here that you need to be aware of and need to be mindful of when you're negotiating agreements. Number one, this is just an OCD thing for me. When you're seeing a contract and it says 50% and it's got parentheses, usually there's numbers are expressed both as words and as digits so that there's no mistakes. They agree with each other. It's very clear. If you're going to do that, this shouldn't say 50 parenthetical 50%. This is just bothering me, probably wouldn't bother anybody else. It should be 50 and then the number 50 and then percent, or it should be 50% and then the figure 50% in the parentheses. Is it bothering anybody else? Ah! All right. 50%, somebody make a noise out there when you think I come across a word or a term or something that should cause you some concern or frighten you. 50% of any and all net sums. What? Did somebody say something? Net? Net? Net is the most frightening word you can find in a royalty provision. So what it's saying is I'm going to pay you 50% of some net figure that I receive. And do you know what a net figure is? Do you? Do you know how to get to net figures? Well, first you take gross figures, gross receipts. You know what gross receipts are? Those are the little carts that you wheel your kid in at Kroger. I'll wait. Usually I do this live and there's a big laugh there. Gross receipts, gross receipts. No, not working. All right. Gross receipts is the amount of money that the publisher takes in, and then they will deduct expenses and get to a net figure in which they will pay you your 50%. The danger here is, what the hell are they taking out? What kind of expenses? You can never have a net. Well, first of all, you always want it to say gross if you can. If you go to Hollywood, the courthouse is lined up with people who are entitled to a portion of net profits from a film and see nothing. Like Eddie Murphy was entitled to a portion of the net profits from Coming to America. He received $0, even though that movie grossed $400 million. There are very creative accounting ways to show no profit, even though you're making tons and tons of money. So what you want, first of all, is gross. You want 50% of the gross. If the publisher says to you, there are certain expenses that we should legitimately be able to deduct before we split it with you, then you have to tell them that you have to define net. You have to define what expenses may be legitimately deducted and maybe even put a cap on those expenses. Otherwise, you will find that they will diminish that amount in a very, very meaningful way. So my advice to you, negotiation-wise, is to cross out net and put gross when you're receiving an agreement like this. And if they come back and say, hey, we have some expenses that we need to deduct from this, you say, you tell me what they are, and we will list them very narrowly and specifically, and even put a cap on them so this can't be abused to diminish the total amount of money that I'm going to make. Also, it says actually received. It should say actually received or credited, because sometimes the publishing company is paid, but they're not going to actually receive any money because they've received some advances previously. So the monies that are earned are just used to reduce those advances. So for instance, if I licensed a song to a video game for $100,000 and my royalty is 10% per copy that they sell, if they sell 50,000 copies, they're not going to send me $5,000. I will not receive, as the publisher, $5,000. But my advance balance will be credited so that it moves from 100,000 down to 95,000. So whenever money is actually received by the publisher or earned or credited to the publisher, you should be entitled, because you probably won't receive any of those advances. I'll get into that later. When the publisher makes a deal and receives advances for something, usually you're not entitled to a portion of those advances. You will only earn your share of whatever money is received or credited for the sale of that material. Okay? So after the word received, and I'll show you this in markup form, it should be or credited. Less cost of collection is also a controversial topic. Some might argue that the publisher is receiving 50% of the income from these compositions in order to absorb all the business costs that go along with generating that income, and so that they should bear the cost of collection for something like that. For instance, I won't go into that, but so it may be that you might be able to strike that if you have enough bargaining power, but it's very, very difficult. All right, so 50%, get out the net. Make sure you receive any money that's actually received or credited, and try to take out less costs of collection from that paragraph. Moving on to paragraph D. Paragraph D. That's public performance money. And what it says there is, as is the case, is that when you register with a public performance society, that they will send your share of your public performance money to you directly as the writer. So the publishing company is going to have 3 separate divisions or companies, each associated with a different PRO. And so they're going to when you write a song, and you're a BMI writer, they're going to register that song with BMI. BMI is going to figure out royalties for that in ways that we will discuss. And then they're going to send the publisher's share directly to the publisher and the writer's share directly to the writer. Be very sure that it says that in this agreement, because there are some historically unethical publishing companies that would try to have that money sent to them, and that means you may never see it, or it means definitely that they can recoup from it, or they shouldn't be able to recoup from it. And number 2, in this day and age, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, where mechanical income has diminished to almost nothing, and streaming income we don't know exactly how that's going to be paid. When publishers are paying advances, they say to themselves, how am I going to get this money recouped? There's no mechanical income to recoup from. Streaming income, I don't know how they're going to handle that. So I want to be able to recoup from public performance money. So they will say in that paragraph D, I get to get that money and recoup from it, and then it'll be part of the regular royalties I pay to you. You should avoid that at all costs. Bottom line, writers should receive their public performance money directly from the performance society that they are affiliated with. Is that clear? Okay. Paragraph E. All right, this has got some complicated stuff in it. If whether or not your publisher is a domestic publisher that has publishing companies that they have to make deals with to represent your material overseas, you know what we call them, right? Sub-publishers. Or they are one of those multinational companies like Sony or Warner Chappell or Pure Music that has offices all over the world. You have to be mindful that there is not too much money being taken out of foreign money before it gets to you by various layers of people. And so in the case of smaller publishing companies that are making publishing deals with, you know, German sub-publisher or Japanese publisher, you want to put a limit on the amount that that sub-publisher can charge. And whatever that limit seems to be fair, maybe it's 25%. So what you're saying is, you, Mob Music, who are representing my stuff, if you make a deal with a German sub-publisher, that German sub-publisher can't take any more than 25% of that money off the top without paying it to me. Okay, so put a limit on what a sub-publisher can charge. And a lot of times, why this is important is because sometimes what you have, especially in the case of a multinational, is you have a domestic company like Warner Chappell who's got related companies all over the world. And they could be taking all sorts of slices of the pie out before it gets to you. Even if they're making arm's length transactions in any specific instance, there could be enough layers of people. You're making a deal with Warner Chappell Germany, who makes a deal with Warner Chappell Berlin, or wherever. There could be all these layers of people that are taking money out. So one common way to solve this is complicated, you can tell me if you get it or if you have questions about it, is that you demand that you receive, as a writer, a minimum percentage of income that's earned at the source. That is, who's ever paying that money initially for the use of your material, you get at least a certain percentage of that. So it might be that some German television company licenses a song for $50,000. What you do is you say, I don't care how many deals you have, who you have sub-publishing deals with, what the deal is, I will receive at least 38%, 37.5% of the total income that is generated from that German television show, where the income is actually earned, the source of the income. So 2 ways to attack this paragraph dealing with foreign royalties is to, number 1, put a maximum percentage that a sub-publisher can take out before sending that money over to the domestic publisher to split with the writer. And number 2, putting in a provision that says, I will receive at least a minimum of X percentage, whatever's fair, of the income that is earned at the source. So it doesn't matter what deals they have with other people, how many layers of people it goes through that's taking a little cut of it, I get a minimum amount of whatever's there at the source. So I'll show that to you both language-wise when I show you how I mark up this paragraph, and then also mathematically if you're so inclined. Okay, it's a pretty complicated one though, right? Keep in mind also that when you look at that paragraph, paragraph E, it says 50%, here's how you'd react to this from what you've learned so far. 50%, you'd go, oh my God, that bothers me that they use the parentheses there wrong. You do that. 50% of any and all net sums. Whoa, net, I don't like that. I either want gross, or I want you to define specifically and narrowly what you can take out and maybe put some caps on that amount. After deduction of foreign taxes actually received, that should say received or credited. And then less any cost of collection. I want that out of there. So you can see how these things come up again and again in these various paragraphs. But I'll show you that when I mark it up. Paragraph F is the publisher doesn't have to give any royalties on copies they distribute for free, and that would be mostly sheet music stuff, and who cares? But be aware that in many, whoa, that's a lag here. Be aware that in many agreements, not being paid for free stuff can be very detrimental, particularly in recording agreements. So keep that in mind. All right, this seems to be glitching, so I'm going to start Zoom again. Thank you.